Hello, today we're going to work on various pages in the packet. And so we're going to work through on pages 22 through 27. We're just going to work on parts of each of them. And I'd like you to turn to page 27 where it says the fabulous circle. We're going to have to make three decisions when we're working with the circle. So when we work with a circle, the very first thing we have to decide is whether we're being asked to find the area or the circumference, because we have to make a decision which formula we're going to work with. And today we're going to work with the area. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this formula. This is the formula we want to work with. And that formula, let's just talk about that. We want to work with A for area equals pi, which is going to be another decision in a minute. And when it's next to each other, it means we're multiplying. And since we haven't had much experience with exponents, that little 2 is called an exponent, it means that we're going to take that r, whatever the radius is, times the radius. It doesn't mean 2 times r. It means the r, the radius, times itself. So let's write it out the long way. So that's the first decision we're going to have to make. The next decision is to decide whether we need the radius or the diameter. With our area formula, we want the radius, but sometimes we're going to be given the diameter and we're going to have to calculate what the radius is. If we work with the circumference formula, it has two versions, pi times the diameter and then pi times 2r, or they usually write it 2 pi r. This, if you recall, 2 radius is the same, doubling up the radius is the same thing as the diameter, but they give us that formula in two different versions. So since we're working with the area formula, we're going to need the radius because it only gives us a radius. Okay, so we have to have this radius. So if they give us a diameter, we have to figure out what the radius is. So it's a great idea when you're working with the circle to always have the radius available and the diameter. So we usually start and show both and then choose the radius. And our last decision is which form of pi we need to use. Pi is very special. It's an irrational number that goes on forever and ever, and that's why we represent it using this symbol. That's a Greek alphabet symbol, and it's not P-I-E, it's P-I. So this is a symbol. Now this is uncomfortable for us initially when we start, but because the symbol represents all of the digits, which we can't possibly write all the digits, the exact answer are also, they might say pi form or in terms of pi, means to leave that pi symbol in your answer. It is placed at the end like a variable. Like if I said 2x, I put the x at the end. If it was 2 pi, I'd put 2 and then a pi symbol at the end. The next version is to use the pi key on the calculator. And that's about as close as we can get to using all the digits for our purposes. So when you use the pi key, you're going to write all the digits that you see on your calculator, as many as it can give us. And then they generally ask us to round. Usually you're asked to round the final answer, sometimes to the nearest whole number, the nearest tenth, hundred, thousandths, etc. So they won't tell you, they won't say, hey, use the pi key, but if they say round your answer, that's an indication to use the pi key. And the last version is to substitute 3.14. Now, in 7th grade, they don't ask us that very often when we're taking a test. But for our purposes, we're going to use this version because this is generally accepted. And where the pi key is, we're going to fill it in, or where the pi symbol is, rather, we're going to fill it in with 3.14. So we're going to start there because this is probably the most user-friendly version of pi. So now, would you please turn to page 22 so we can work with this? So this is you can see a chart, and we're going to practice before we begin independent work. We're going to practice working with the circle, finding the area of the circle. And you can see there's the three different versions of pi. So our formula, area equals pi r squared, that means pi times r times r. And as mentioned, we're going to start here for today. We'll continue this lesson in the future, maybe the next 2 days. We'll see how far we get. So if you recall, we have to know the formula. Okay, that's the first thing. We know the formula. So let's write our formula down. And we're going to write it in this third column. Area equals pi times r times r. And to make this easier on ourselves, the next decision is we have to know whether we need the radius or the diameter. And the formula tells us we need the radius. So we're going to start with this circle up here that already shows the radius. We'll deal with what happens when we're not given the radius, but let's start with this one. So now we're going to substitute where the r's are. We're going to replace it with this number 7, both r's. But also, since we're given permission to substitute 3.14 for pi, we're going to do that same thing. So the next line, we get to fill in pi with 3.14, and then we get to fill in the radius with the number 7 from that first circle above, and we do that twice. So now we have all numbers. 3.14 times 7 times 7. So would you stop and use your calculator and figure that out? All right, and that answer, and if you want to leave a little bit of space, I want to talk about something else. The answer is 153 and 86 hundredths. And if we remember, we're supposed to put our unit of measure, which is centimeters. And because we're finding area, we want a little 2. Now I left a space on purpose. When I'm working with this, we can put all these numbers in a calculator, which is great. But I kind of like to, and I'd encourage you to do it an in-between step. Once I put pi, or in this case 3.14, I'm going to be dealing with decimals. And it makes us a little bit harder for us to estimate our answer. So if we do this first, if we work with the number, the r times r, which is r squared, and go ahead and do this in-between step, leaving 3.14, and this would give us 7 times 7 is 49. Once I have that, then I can say, okay, I think I want to estimate this. 3 times 49, which I could round off to 50. I can estimate my answer now. 3 times 50, I'm just estimating, this is 50, would be 150. And now that I have my answer, this is really close to 150. And recall, if I rounded this to 3, I rounded down, and if I rounded this to 50, I rounded up. So between the two of them, this answer makes sense. And I like to do that because when I'm working with decimals, sometimes it's hard for my brain to calculate that and see if my answer is indeed a reasonable answer. Do you have to do the in-between step if you have a calculator? No, but I would suggest it if you do. I'd always work with the r times r first. Okay, let's do our second example together. And our second example is this circle, and it gives us a diameter. And we can see we don't have d for diameter in our formula. So I would generally start this way anyway. We have the diameter as 12 centimeters, but I need the radius, and the radius is just half of that. So in our last lesson, if you recall, we said that we can take that diameter and divide it by 2. So 12 divided by 2 would be 6 centimeters. And by the way, over here we're given the radius, and just to recall, if we wanted to find the diameter, which we don't need for this formula, but we would multiply it by 2, and we would have gotten 14 centimeters. So we're going to start again. We're going to practice this again. And recall, we really want the radius. So let's start with the formula. That's our first step. We're acknowledging that we understand what formula we're working with. And now we're going to do what's called the substitution. area equals, we're allowed to substitute this time with 3.14, so we're replacing that symbol of pi with 3.14. And this time the radius is 6, so times 6 times 6. So this time I am going to include my in-between step before I continue. 3.14 I'm going to let hang out for a minute, and I'm going to work with 6 times 6, which is 36. So I'm going to just estimate my answer. I'm going to estimate 3.14 as just being 3, rounded to a whole number, 3 times 36. So 3 times 30 is 90, and 3 times 6 is 18. So 90 plus 18. My answer should be approximately 108. And I'm expecting it to be bigger because I didn't use these 2 digits. So now, pause, use your calculator, and take 3.14 times 36. And hopefully you had 113 and 400ths. And remember, our estimation was 108. So this is and we expected it to be bigger because we're using more digits in the decimal. So 113 is not that far away from 108. So now we just want to get used to this. This is, again, what I think is the easiest way to use pi, the most user-friendly. So we're going to start using 3.14, and would you please turn now to page 23. Okay, this is the packet for the area of a circle that we're going to work in over the next couple days. And it says, recall the relationship between the radius and diameter before you begin. We're going to calculate both so that we can practice this skill. However, we'll use the radius because the area formula uses the radius, not the diameter. So there's a picture of a radius in case you've forgotten the diameter. For every problem, use these steps to find the area of a circle. We're going to find the radius if it's not given. We're going to write the area formula. We're going to substitute the numbers. And we're going to calculate the answer and label the units of measure. And I believe in the last problem I forgot to label the units of measure. I believe it should have been centimeters squared. So you notice that this says find the exact answer. We're going to save that for our next lesson. So would you please turn to the next page, page 24. And we want to go to problem 5 and 6 because that's where it says we're to find the answer substituting 3.14 for pi. So you see we're given that this radius is 2 centimeters. It asks us to find the diameter, even though we're not going to use it. And so you're going to start by finding the diameter. Then you're going to do, the very first thing you're going to do is the formula. And you don't have to write this, I'm just reminding you what to do since it's on a different page. Then you're going to substitute, in this case 3.14, and you're going to substitute for r. You're going to fill in those variables. And then you're going to calculate the answer. I'd love to see the in-between step where you find out what radius times radius is, but it's fine if you don't want to with the units, as I've forgotten. Okay, so I'd like you to try 5, 6, 7, and 8 independently, and have an awesome day.